Okay, real talk. Imagine you're at a restaurant. Someone at the next table is eating with their hands. And your first instinct is, ew, that's unsanitary. Now, what if I told you that person is actually digesting their food better than you? That their gut health is probably stronger? And that what they're doing has been scientifically validated by modern research? Today we're going into something that's going to completely flip the way you think about eating. The ancient practice of eating with your hands, and why modern science is finally catching up to what Indian sages figured out thousands of years ago. We live in a world obsessed with hygiene. Hand sanitizers, gloves, sterile everything. And somewhere along the way we decided, cutlery equals civilization. That using your hands to eat is primitive, backwards. But here's what's fascinating. The science doesn't agree with that narrative at all. The more researchers dig into gut health, microbiome science, and mindful eating, the more they're discovering that what billions of people in India, the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia have done for thousands of years was actually deeply intelligent. So let's break this down. The biology, the ancient wisdom, and why this actually matters for you. Here's what we're covering today. First, the Western double standard around hygiene, and why gloves aren't what you think they are. Second, the actual neuroscience and gut biology behind eating with your hands. This part genuinely surprised me when I researched it. And third, what ancient Indian Vedic science said about this thousands of years ago, and how uncannily it lines up with cutting-edge research today. If you're new here, this is Tatva Beyond Silence, ancient Eastern wisdom decoded through modern science. Let's get into it. So, the hygiene argument first, because it's the elephant in the room. Every time a food video from India or Southeast Asia goes up online and the cook is using bare hands, the comments are predictable. So unhygienic. Where are the gloves? This is disgusting. And look, I get it. The instinct makes sense on the surface. But that argument falls apart pretty quickly when you actually examine it. Because hygiene isn't about whether you have gloves on. Hygiene is about whether your hands or your gloves are actually clean. Here's something most people don't know. A 2012 study published in the Journal of Food Protection found that when food workers wear gloves, their hand-washing frequency drops dramatically. The logic in their heads becomes, I've got gloves on, I'm covered. So they touch multiple surfaces, handle different foods, and don't wash as often. The result? Bacterial accumulation inside gloves can actually be higher than on bare, properly washed hands. Gloves create a false sense of security. They're a visual signal of cleanliness, not actual cleanliness. And here's where the double standard gets really interesting. Go watch Gordon Ramsay in his kitchen, Heston Blumenthal, any Michelin-starred chef. How do they taste their food? With their fingers. How do they check texture? With their hands. How do they finish the garnish? Directly with their fingertips. These are the most celebrated chefs on the planet, and bare hand contact with food is standard practice. But when a home cook in India does the same thing, suddenly it's unsanitary. That's not a hygiene standard. That's a cultural bias dressed up as a hygiene standard. And let's put this in perspective. Over 60% of the world's population traditionally eats with their hands, or did until very recently. India, of course, most of the Middle East, large parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, Ethiopia, where communal hand eating is central to culture. These aren't underdeveloped societies that haven't figured out cutlery yet. These are ancient civilizations with deep traditions around food. Traditions that, as we'll see, had real physiological reasoning behind them. Now let's get into the actual science, because this is where things get genuinely fascinating. Ancient Indian Vedic texts describe something called the Pancha Tatva, the five elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space. And they mapped each finger of the hand to one of these elements: thumb, fire; index finger, air; middle finger, space; ring finger, earth; little finger, water. The teaching was that when you eat with your hands, food receives the energy of all five elements through touch, creating a complete energetic exchange. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's spiritual, but what does science say? Here's where it gets interesting, because modern neuroscience is describing something remarkably similar, just with different vocabulary. Your fingertips contain the highest concentration of nerve endings of anywhere on your body. That's not spiritual, that's anatomy. They're packed with something called mechanoreceptors, sensory receptors that detect touch, pressure, texture, and temperature, and send signals directly to the brain. So what happens when those highly sensitive fingertips make contact with food? Your brain gets a signal, and that signal triggers something researchers call the cephalic phase of digestion. And this right here is one of the most underappreciated facts in nutritional science. The cephalic phase of digestion, cephalic meaning head or brain, is the first phase of digestion. It begins before food even enters your mouth. When you see food, smell food, or touch food, your brain sends signals to the gut to start preparing. Saliva production increases. Gastric acid secretion begins. Digestive enzymes start releasing. Your body is warming up its digestive system, the same way you'd warm up before a workout. Hand contact with food is a powerful trigger for this cephalic phase. A fork or spoon? The signal is minimal. Metal doesn't communicate with your nervous system the way living tissue does. Think of it this way. Imagine you're about to exercise. You could walk straight from your desk to a full sprint. Or you could warm up, get the blood flowing, prepare your muscles, prime your cardiovascular system. Which one gives you a better workout and protects you from injury? Obviously the warm-up. Eating with your hands is essentially a warm-up for your digestive system. You're priming the gut, activating enzymes, increasing secretions, before the food even arrives. Eating with cutlery skips that warm-up almost entirely. And over thousands of meals across a lifetime, that difference in digestive efficiency adds up significantly. Here's another benefit that's almost embarrassingly obvious once you think about it. Temperature sensing. Your hands are natural thermometers. When you reach for food with your hand, if it's dangerously hot, you know immediately. You pull back, you wait, you naturally protect your mouth, throat, and esophagus. With a fork or spoon, there's no warning system. The metal doesn't feel hot the way your skin does. Food goes straight into your mouth, and you find out it's scalding after the fact. How many times have you burned the roof of your mouth eating with cutlery? This is a protective mechanism built into hand eating, your body's sensory system doing exactly what it evolved to do. Okay, now we're getting to the part that I think is the most compelling from a modern science perspective. The gut microbiome. If you've been paying attention to health research over the last decade, you know this is one of the hottest areas in all of science right now. Your gut contains approximately 100 trillion microorganisms. 100 trillion. And this ecosystem doesn't just digest your food, it regulates your immune system. It produces neurotransmitters that affect your mood and mental health. It influences your metabolism, your inflammation levels, your risk for dozens of chronic diseases. The gut has literally been called the second brain. And it turns out, The connection between your gut and your hands is more direct than you might expect. Your skin has its own microbiome, the skin microbiome. Your hands carry a diverse community of bacteria, most of which are completely harmless or actively beneficial. These microorganisms have co-evolved with humans over millions of years. They're part of our biology. When you eat with clean hands, these bacteria travel with your food into your gut, and they contribute to the diversity of your gut microbiome. This connects to something called the hygiene hypothesis, a well-established concept in immunology. The idea is that our modern obsession with sterility has actually backfired. By eliminating too much microbial exposure, we've weakened our immune systems, left them undertrained and overreactive. The evidence for the hygiene hypothesis is substantial. Studies consistently show children raised on farms with exposure to soil, animals, and diverse microbial environments have significantly lower rates of allergies, asthma, and autoimmune conditions compared to children raised in highly sanitized urban environments. Their immune systems got trained. They learned to distinguish genuine threats from harmless exposures. Over-sanitized environments produce immune systems that are undertrained and therefore overreact to things they shouldn't. Eating with your hands, when those hands are clean but not sterile, is a form of natural, low-level microbial exposure that your immune system was designed to receive. It's not dirty. It's biologically appropriate. Now, let's go back to the ancient texts, because the convergence here is remarkable. The Charaka Samhita, one of the foundational texts of Ayurveda, written thousands of years ago, specifically describes how eating with hands stimulates what it calls Agni. Agni literally means fire. In Ayurvedic medicine, it refers to digestive fire, the metabolic capacity to transform food into energy and nutrients. Today we'd say it activates the cephalic phase of digestion. It primes digestive enzyme secretion. Different language, same phenomenon. Without a microscope, without a lab, just thousands of years of careful observation.
There's another layer to this from Vedic science. The science of mudras. Mudras are specific hand and finger positions used in yoga, meditation, and ritual. The Vedic tradition holds that these positions influence the flow of energy through specific channels in the body, affecting different organs and systems. Now, when you eat with your hands, the way you naturally cup food, pinch, gather, your fingers fall into specific positions that are essentially natural mudras. In yoga, specific mudras are associated with activating specific organs, including digestive organs. When you eat with your hands, this is happening. We're just not consciously noticing it. Let's talk about something that gets overlooked in all the gut health and neuroscience discussion: the psychological dimension. Eating with your hands is inherently a mindful practice. When your hands make direct contact with food, you're physically connected to what you're consuming. You feel the texture, the temperature, the consistency. You're not on autopilot, shoveling food into your mouth while scrolling your phone. You're present with your meal. And this is essentially what the entire mindful eating movement is trying to teach people to do. A multi-billion-dollar wellness industry in the US right now. Your grandmother in India just did it naturally. Every meal. For free. The research on mindful eating is solid. When people eat more slowly and with greater sensory awareness, satiety signals work more effectively. The brain gets clearer communication from the gut about fullness. People naturally eat less without feeling deprived. Here's the physiological reason hand eating tends to be slower. You can only pick up as much food as your fingers can comfortably hold. That natural portion control doesn't exist with a fork. Studies on eating pace consistently show slower eaters consume fewer calories, experience less overeating, report greater meal satisfaction. Hand eating isn't just a cultural practice. It's a built-in mechanism for eating at a pace your digestive system can actually handle. There's one more connection I want to draw, and it's specific to Indian food culture. A significant portion of traditional Indian cuisine is fermented. Yogurt, idli and dosa batter, pickles, fermented chutneys. Fermented foods contain live, beneficial bacteria, probiotics. Now, when you eat fermented foods with your hands, you get a synergistic effect. The diverse bacteria on your skin microbiome combine with the probiotic bacteria in the food, creating what researchers describe as increased microbial diversity in the gut. Indian food culture essentially delivered a daily probiotic dose through a combination of fermented foods and hand eating, with zero supplements required. The wisdom was always there. It just took us a while to understand the mechanism. Post-2020, there was an explosion in microbiome research globally. And some of the most interesting findings came from cross-cultural comparisons. Researchers consistently found populations in countries with strong hand-eating traditions had significantly higher gut microbiome diversity than populations in heavily industrialized, highly sanitized societies. And gut microbiome diversity is one of the strongest predictors we have of overall health, immune function, mental health, metabolic health, longevity. This wasn't the hypothesis researchers started with. They went in looking at diet, genetics, geography, and they kept finding this pattern around hand contact with food. What was dismissed as primitive or unsanitary turned out to be a consistent predictor of better gut health outcomes. Here's something that science is beginning to take seriously, and that Vedic tradition described explicitly. Intention affects matter. When a grandmother makes food with her hands, she's not just delivering nutrition, she's delivering touch, presence, care. We're not yet at the point where we can say, love changes food molecules, but we're at the point where how food is prepared affects its impact on the person eating it is not a crazy statement. Epigenetics, embodied cognition, the gut-brain axis, all pointing toward the idea that the experience of eating, not just the nutritional content, matters for health outcomes. The Vedic concept of intention in touch is at least pointing at something real. Let's get practical for a second. The case for eating with your hands is strong, but it comes with a non-negotiable caveat. Your hands need to be actually clean, washed with soap, nails trimmed and clean. This isn't optional, it's the whole point. The beneficial microbiome effect comes from natural bacteria on clean skin, not from contamination or poor hygiene. And here's something worth knowing. Even after thorough hand washing, your beneficial skin microbiome repopulates within minutes. Soap removes transient contaminants without permanently destroying your resident microbiome. So, clean hands, not sterile hands. That's the target. Your body was designed to work with a living microbiome, not without one. And something worth noting about the regulatory side of this.
The World Health Organization's food safety guidelines actually list proper hand washing as more effective than gloves for most food handling situations. Gloves are specifically recommended in cases where workers have open wounds or cuts, or in very high-volume commercial settings, handling ready-to-eat foods at scale. The widespread gloves for everything norm we see in food service, that came from over-interpretation of guidelines, combined with liability concerns, not from science saying gloves are categorically safer. The science says, wash your hands, thoroughly, frequently. That's what actually matters. Cultural bias and regulatory confusion created a myth, and we've been dismissing an entire food tradition because of it. Let me give you a historical perspective that I think completely reframes this conversation. The ancient universities of India, Takshashila and Nalanda, the world's first universities, attracting students from across Asia, the Middle East, and beyond. These institutions produced foundational work in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, linguistics, philosophy. The scholars there ate with their hands, from clay and stone vessels. Were these people unhygienic, primitive? Or did they operate with a different, and in some ways more sophisticated, understanding of what hygiene actually means? One that included harmony with the body's natural systems, rather than warfare against all microorganisms. Ayurveda describes something called shadrasa, the 6 tastes: sweet, salty, sour, pungent, bitter, and astringent. A complete balanced meal contains all 6. Each taste activates different digestive responses. Together they create complete nutritional and metabolic coverage. Here's what's interesting about how this relates to hand eating. When you eat with your hands, you naturally mix and balance your plate as you go. A little of this, a little of that, adjusting based on what you feel and taste. You're constantly in sensory contact with your food, making real-time adjustments. With cutlery, eating becomes more mechanical. The intuitive mixing that naturally creates balance becomes less likely. Here's a twist in the story that I genuinely love. The world's top fine dining restaurants, Noma in Copenhagen, El Bulli, 11 Madison Park. They've been moving towards something called finger food fine dining. Guests are explicitly invited to eat with their hands, encouraged to feel the texture, experience the temperature, engage with the food physically. Renee Redzepi at Noma has spoken about how eating with your hands changes the entire experience of tasting. You're more present, more engaged. The flavors land differently. This is a $300 a plate restaurant, telling wealthy patrons to put down their cutlery and use their fingers. What grandmothers in India have done for free, every day, for thousands of years, elite Western restaurants are now charging a premium for, as a revelatory experience. Japan is another fascinating example, because Japan is globally synonymous with cleanliness, precision, and hygiene. In traditional sushi culture, authentic omakase, you're supposed to eat nigiri with your fingers. The reason is practical and sensory. Chopsticks can compress the rice, disrupting the carefully constructed texture of the nigiri. Fingers allow you to feel the temperature balance between the rice and the fish, something the chef has specifically calibrated. Many sushi masters will actually tell guests that eating with chopsticks is the less refined approach for nigiri. Japan, arguably the world's most hygiene-conscious culture, preserved hand eating as the highest form of engaging with their most celebrated cuisine. That tells you something. In Ethiopia, sharing injera,
A fermented sourdough flatbread from a communal plate with your hands is one of the most important social rituals in the culture. There's even a practice called gursha, where you hand feed someone directly, which is an act of deep affection. Food is connection, not just nutrition. This is something we've largely lost in the modern West. The clinical separation of the individual from their food and from the people they're eating with. Cutlery didn't just change how we eat, it changed the social experience of eating, made it more transactional, less communal. The hands in the plate approach isn't just physiologically better in some ways, it's also socially and emotionally richer. In Vedic tradition, food is described with the phrase Anna Brahma. Food is the divine. Food is not merely fuel, it is sacred. And the act of receiving food with your hands, feeling it, connecting with it, was treated as a form of reverence, an acknowledgement that this nourishment sustains life. That framing has profound implications for how we eat. If food is sacred, then eating is a ritual, not a task to get through while answering emails. And that ritual framing naturally produces the mindfulness, the presence, the sensory engagement that researchers have now demonstrated has real physiological benefits. The ancient sages encoded the health benefit inside the spiritual practice. The practice made the physiology happen, whether or not the person understood the mechanism. Let's do a quick summary of the science before we go further. Documented benefits of eating with your hands, according to current research. 1. Activates the cephalic phase of digestion. Your gut starts preparing before food enters your mouth. 2. Temperature sensing prevents burns. 3. Natural pace control. You eat more slowly, overeating decreases. 4. Skin microbiome contributes to gut microbiome diversity and immune function. 5. Proprioceptive feedback enhances mindful eating and meal satisfaction. This isn't folk medicine. These are peer-reviewed, evidence-supported mechanisms. Modern research backed. Now, the counter-argument. Because I want to be fair here. Eating with unwashed hands is genuinely dangerous. Contaminated water sources, poor sanitation infrastructure. These are real issues, and they're not to be romanticized. The critics who point to unhygienic conditions have a legitimate concern, but their criticism is misdirected. The problem isn't the hands. The problem is the surrounding sanitation, water quality, surface cleanliness, food storage. Focusing on gloves versus no gloves, while ignoring those systemic issues, is missing the forest for the trees. And often, it's also a way of dismissing an entire culinary culture without actually engaging with what's happening. Here's something I want to speak directly to. Especially for anyone watching this who grew up in a household where hand eating was normal, but learned to feel embarrassed about it. How many times have you been at a restaurant or someone's house in the West and apologized for eating with your hands? Sorry, it's a cultural thing. Why are you apologizing? You're practicing a physiologically superior method of eating that has been validated by modern neuroscience and gut biology. You're engaging in a tradition that stretches back thousands of years through one of the world's most sophisticated civilizations. The only thing that needs updating is the self-consciousness, not the practice. There's a pattern here that goes well beyond eating with hands. Turmeric, used medicinally in India for centuries, is now sold in every Whole Foods as a golden latte. Curcumin supplements are a multi-billion-dollar industry. Meditation, the ancient Vedic and Buddhist practice, is now prescribed by doctors and employers as a mental health intervention.
Intermittent fasting, which has parallels in Ekadashi, the traditional Hindu fasting practice observed twice a month, is now one of the most researched dietary protocols in metabolic medicine. The pattern is consistent: ancient Eastern practice. Western science eventually catches up. Western market packages and sells it back. The wisdom was never lost. We just stopped trusting it for a while. I want to zoom out for a moment and ask a bigger question. Why did ancient civilizations across India, the Middle East, Africa, independently converge on eating with hands? They didn't have peer-reviewed journals. They didn't have microscopes or neuroimaging. What they had was thousands of years of careful collective observation. Attention to what made people healthy, what made digestion work well, what eating practices produced vital, long-lived communities. And they encoded those observations into culture, into tradition, into ritual. We are now, with our sophisticated technology, essentially rediscovering what that accumulated wisdom pointed at, which should make us a lot more humble about dismissing ancient practices just because we don't immediately understand the mechanism. So where does this leave us? You don't need to immediately switch to eating every meal with your hands if that feels uncomfortable in your current context. Cultural change is gradual and personal. But maybe start at home. One meal. Just try it with full intention. Wash your hands, sit down, no phone. Feel the texture of your food. Pay attention to temperature. Mix things naturally with your fingers. See how differently you experience that meal, how much more present you feel, how the flavors seem to land differently when you're physically connected to what you're eating. That's not mysticism. That's your nervous system working exactly the way it was designed to. This is what Tatva Beyond Silence is here to do. The ancient world figured out a lot of things. Not everything. They had blind spots too. But the traditions that survived thousands of years of human experience deserve serious attention before we dismiss them. Every episode here, we take one of those traditions, something that might look superstitious, primitive, or simply old, and we follow the evidence. Sometimes the evidence says the tradition doesn't hold up. We'll tell you that too. But more often than I expected when I started this, the evidence says they were onto something. They just described it in the language they had available. And our job is to translate. The Back to Roots movement is growing in the West, and not because of nostalgia. It's growing because people are realizing that the relentless march towards sterility, efficiency, and technological mediation of every human experience has costs. Gut health epidemics, autoimmune disease rates rising, anxiety and depression at record levels, a pervasive sense of disconnection from the body, from food, from each other. Ancient practices didn't create those problems. The abandonment of ancient practices might have contributed to them. Eating with your hands is a small thing, but small things compound. And the science is clear. This particular small thing is worth revisiting. So here's what I'd love for you to take from this. Not just the science, though the science is genuinely fascinating, but a shift in perspective. The next time you see someone eating with their hands, in a video, in a restaurant, at a dinner table, before the word unsanitary forms in your mind, replace it with a question. What do they know that I might not? Often the answer, it turns out, is quite a lot. And if you grew up eating with your hands and ever felt embarrassed about it in a Western context, I hope this gives you solid, science-backed ground to stand on. You were doing it right. If this video made you think differently about something, that's all we're going for here. Drop a comment. Do you eat with your hands? Have you ever felt self-conscious about it in certain contexts? I genuinely love to hear. And if you know someone who'd benefit from the science in this video, share it with them. Sometimes the best way to change a conversation is to hand someone the evidence. Subscribe to Tatva Beyond Silence. New episodes every week, going deep on the intersection of ancient Eastern wisdom and modern science. We'll see you in the next one.